getting rid of that is hard. It's very hard. Jealousy, envy, not feeling like I've succeeded or I've made enough money or I'm good enough.
This is the Eternally Focused Podcast. Welcome to the EFOPOD.
All right, so today Greg and I are going to be diving into a question that we all need to ask ourselves. What do we worship? And I mean, really worship. We're not just talking about what do we say we believe in, but what do we actually focus our time and our energy on? What are our passions? Right, Greg?
Passions. Ooh, I didn't know that word was going to get thrown in there. I didn't know. I spend my time and effort thinking about money, making money, driving myself crazy, my job, right? That's where I spend way too much time.
Yeah.
Passion? No, not a passion. Not at all. No, but I suppose, I think passion's a good word. You just kind of threw me a curveball there.
Sure. Well, I mean a little bit more poignant than that. Maybe we start with something like something that hits home a little bit, like college football. A lot of Americans, especially men, love college football. And if there's a lady listening to this right now, I'd say either it's possible she's really into it, but she definitely has a man in her life that's really geared towards that.
Yeah,
And
especially in the Southeast, right? The Southeastern
sure.
Conference, the dominant football conference in the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and Greg, both of us, we've had our own moments in our lives where we've both been heavily involved in college football, maybe when we were in college.
Yeah, I got caught up in the mob mentality. Yeah, I was on the field when our university beat its greatest rival and picking up, grass and, cheering on people, tearing down goalposts and stuff. Yeah, I was there. Yeah, that was a long time ago, but I don't know.
Mine wasn't as long ago as yours, but our team did a similar thing. We were on ESPN, which was a big deal for our school, and me and probably 40 other people rushed the field after the game. That was a big deal for us at our small little D2 school. But
Yeah.
But sometimes the devotion that we see around sports and college football, it can be intense, like we just described, rushing a field, really probably screaming a little too much, maybe getting too much into it. And those things happen Saturday at the stadium and people are cheering. But then on Sunday, those same people, maybe not all of them, but there's a decent amount, especially here in the South, that end up at church on a Sunday. And that passion that we just saw on Saturday night isn't represented on Sunday in the pews.
Yeah, I'm the first guy. I'm standing there singing, but my hands are in my pocket, but if I'm at the football game, my hands are up and, I don't know, I'm doing the wave, whatever they do, because I do care about, I guess, somewhat football nowadays, but it's changed. It's different since I was saved, I guess. I'm not really sure I just don't get it anymore. I don't know why. I have friends and they lose their mind over it. Man. But I don't lose my mind when I'm at church on Sunday.
Yeah.
I want to be a little bit more charismatic on Sunday. I'm not sure that I'm self-conscious.
Yeah.
Whereas everybody's crazy at a football game.
Right. Well, it's the mob mentality, maybe.
Maybe we need more mob mentality at church.
Yeah, I think so.
I might not even be allowed to come back to church after saying that.
Well, when something good becomes something ultimate in our lives, it's like we're saying, God, you can have our Sunday morning, but Saturday, the rest of the days of the week, those belong to me.
Oh, it's so hard. I read Counterfeit Gods today by Keller and
Tim Keller, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, it's very convicting. I've read it before years ago. I've had it on the shelf. I broke it out because I knew what the conversation was going to be. But, I look at my life and I think, what am I pursuing? And how do I balance that out? I got to pay the bills, There's subtle things, What am I worshiping? Am I worshiping, myself? You know,
Yeah.
Success is such a big, important thing in culture to be validated. I think it permeates. I could be wrong. I'm not really a successful guy. So,
When you say success, what do you mean?
no, well, I'm not, I guess there's a lot of sides to that coin.
Absolutely.
And it's dependent upon where you are in your society, right?
Yeah.
I live in the suburbs. There's, always people that are going to be probably more successful, wealthier, whatever it is than I am. So I'm not one of those people that's, the big donor or, I'm still just struggling every single day, trying to make a living to pay the bills for the family.
Well, and this conversation reminds me of something that D.L. Moody once said. He said, "Our greatest fear should not be failure, but of succeeding at something that doesn't really matter." And I think you might be hitting that a little bit in defining success, possibly.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard balance. Like I said, it's subtle. Where I live and, I live like a king in comparison to different parts of the world or different places here in our city. Yeah. So it's tough. It's very tough to say success or not success, define success. Success is fleeting. It's something you're never going to catch. It's something that we're trying to accomplish so that we think in our mind that the world will validate us. I did this, look at me. And it's not true.
Well, and as a follower of Christ, I think there's a rub there, because defining success, I think, falls into what we're discussing with worship. And I would say when we look at Jesus, and he's talking on the Sermon on the Mount in particular, in Matthew 6. In verse 33, he talks about seeking first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Mm-hmm. He goes on to say that, or actually a few verses, if you back up just a little bit, in verse 26, he actually talks about, he says, "If God is providing for the birds of the air, how much more do you think he cares about you?" And so there's also an idea of, if we are successful in the worldly aspect and what we think of come the American dream and so forth, is that success coming from something that we're doing for ourselves, or is that something that God's doing?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I struggle with that. I think that God has to provide opportunities. I think he expects us to work. He created us to work. Mm-hmm. But, there's times when God slows us down. And there may not be work. There may not be always something to do. And that for me is really tough. I've been in industries. I've been in sales my whole life. And there's good times and there's bad times. There's feast and famine, as my father would say. But there's a purpose behind it all. There's rest but I think the main factor is trusting in the Lord for his provision.
Well, and I think that comes to something that this feeds into as well, is self-worship. I think we find ourselves in society a lot of times worshiping ourselves, saying that we provided this, we did this. We hear a lot of "I" and a lot of the things
what
that we
I
say.
accomplished.
Yeah.
Right. And then, you have some success, something, you make some money, and then, probably what is the first thing you go and do with it is go out and buy yourself something.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. You have that first dollar you ever made framed in your house, right?
You're right. No, I don't. It's been long gone. But yeah, we go buy a watch or something, right? Or a car or a house. Yeah, there's all of those things are about, hey, look at me, worship me, validate me.
Right.
They're not pointing to God, to Jesus. They're not pointing to um, the truth of what this life's about.
Yeah. Well, and that's not something I would say that we get from ourselves. Like we are sinful beings living in a sinful world, a sinful, broken world at that. And yet at the same time, it's no mystery where these things come from. I mean, just look at our culture and what they talk about. Living your truth, putting yourself first, self-made success, all these terms. And then you go and see these TED Talks and you see these people that make thousands upon thousands of dollars getting in front of big groups of people, telling them how that they are great and all these things that
Yeah, well, you deserve.
matter.
What is it? Every Madison Avenue commercial marketing is just pounded into our heads. You
Right.
deserve this. You've earned this. You are this. You want to get the pretty girl. You need this.
Right.
So you got to go out there and succeed. You got to make that money. It's all about money, 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 and it does not fill the hole
Right.
that's in our hearts.
That God-sized hole.
Right. The God-sized hole is that we like to say, that only God can fill.
Right.
And I question myself and say, well, you're thinking about these things, work and making money, and what am I worshiping? What am I pursuing?
Well, and at the core of it, this mindset, this form of worship, it takes our focus away from relying on God.
Yeah. And I think for me, he brings me back to that. He wants me to trust in him. I don't know and understand. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for all the things that he's done for me. All right. I mean,
Agreed.
he provides everything. So when it is in that famine time, I just have to trust that he's going to lead me through. We're going to find another way. We're going to find something else to provide for the family.
Yeah.
He wants me to do that. It's not that he wants me to sit around not working and praying. They like to say you can't lean on a shovel and pray for potatoes, right?
Just in Idaho.
Yeah. Yeah, they just pop out of the ground there. Well, actually, they're on a big trailer, but... So I don't know. It's definitely there's a little bit that I have to participate. But like I said, I think I have to be dependent upon God for the opportunities.
Right.
And then, he expects me to do something with those.
Well, and I think that's where we come back to the eternal focus. God doesn't just want a few hours on that Sunday morning, as we were talking about earlier. He wants our lives. And I think that's a really hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, because we do get caught up so often in this American mindset and the culture. And it's not just America. We just happen to live in America, but it's the culture of the environment that we're in. It's kind of like a magnetic field that draws you in. And we're called to worship God alone, not the things that fade away. And it's so funny because we see that happen so often in the world. I see that in my own life. You just mentioned getting your first job and going and spending a paycheck on a watch or a car or a house or something along those lines. And we see that so often in our culture with people just in everyday life. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, even in my mind, I'll have an Apple product and I think to myself, oh, the new Apple Watch came out. And mine's 4 generations old at this point. Maybe I should look at getting the newest one. Now, my 4-generation-old one still works perfectly fine, but there's just something in that marketing that they do in society, and that's why it's so important to hold fast.
Yeah, well, God tells us in the Bible to be careful.
Yes.
To be careful and with greed. Be a good steward. Don't outspend, your blessings. Don't put yourself into debt. Don't put yourself into a place where you have to be greedy, where you have to take advantage of other people, where you have to manipulate people. That's part of what I'm saying by God's going to bring an opportunity and you have to do, certain things with it. He expects you to treat people fairly. He expects you to do things correctly with it. And the reason that people don't is because they don't feel like they have enough.
Right.
They want more and more and more. And, I'm guilty of it too. I'm not preaching. I got 72 pair of pants in my closet. I don't need another pair of pants. I can tell you that.
I thought you told me 73 the other day.
It might be. I have no idea how many there are. I'm run out of hangers. So I think that's why God says, be careful with money, be careful with greed, be a good steward, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Right.
But that's not how the world's operating out there. It's all out for me, what I can get. And I don't care what happens to you.
Well, and that's why I love the Bible, because it's just so opposite of what we see in the world. And even just when the Pharisees came and the Sadducees were sitting there talking, and Jesus is sitting, and a lawyer asked him a question and asked him what the greatest commandment is in the law. And this is just in case you want to go look at it. It's Matthew 22:37. And Jesus says to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and the second's like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." And for me, when I hear those words, I think that it's so simple in the verbiage that's expressed there, and yet it's so complex at the same time. But all these things that we're talking about, these worldly aspects, would be so easy to not even allow them to sink into our brains if we were just taking this in and really applying it in our lives on a daily basis. And yet I want to beat myself up, because sometimes it's so frustrating that I stray from that. And it can just come from a tough conversation at work or a tough conversation at home. And then all of a sudden my day is completely thrown off, or at least my mindset is in that time frame. And then I have to just kind of come back to center. And that's why I think it's so important to be in the Word morning and night, as it says, because I need that refresher, every day.
Well, I don't think, and I hope no people don't mishear me. Houses and cars and watches, there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with wealth. That's not what I'm saying. It's when it becomes the ultimate thing. It's when we're pursuing it so hard that we're sacrificing relationships on the altar of success.
Yeah.
The priority of your relationships has got to be in a specific order. It's got to be God first, and then family and the other things are going to come secondarily to that relationship. I am confident, though, that I still struggle with loving the Lord my God with all my heart and all my soul. I think there is still a lot of me in there.
Sure.
Getting rid of that is hard. It's very hard. Jealousy, envy, not feeling like I've succeeded or I've made enough money or I'm good enough. They're always going to be part of my sinful, broken nature.
Yeah. Well, and I think it kind of all culminates and comes back to this idea of what is on the throne of our lives. What is that thing that we put ahead of everything else? And are we willing to put God in that place? Those are two tough questions, I think, to answer.
Honestly, I think I answer it and I say yes. But then I look at my life and I say, really?
But honestly, what is on the throne of our lives, that question right there is a harder one. It's not harder to answer necessarily. It's harder to say out loud, maybe, for some of us.
But don't you think God's gonna reign? He's gonna be on that throne.
Oh, he is.
And he's gonna take away from you what is replacing him.
Are you saying right now in this life, or
Yeah, I'm
in the
saying
life
in
to
this
come?
life. I'm saying in this life right now.
Yeah.
I think if you are saved, if you are a Christian, God is going to do you the favor, to put it that way,
Mm-hmm.
of removing what it is that you're worshiping.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm right in that theologically, but I would say that, well, biblically, we see that play out.
Yeah.
And we see it with Abraham and Isaac, and he says, put him on the altar.
Right.
Abraham did as he was told, and God gave a substitute ram in the thicket over there.
Correct.
Can I do that with my son? I don't know. I don't know that I can. You know,
You're saying if God called you to sacrifice your son?
I think that would be, I don't know. I can't say that,
Yeah.
you know,
No, that is tough.
or my daughter or anything like that.
I mean, I would hope, obviously as we talk out loud about this, I would love for my answer to be yes. But if I'm
Right.
being honest with myself as I think through that in this moment, there's a pause.
Right. But God did it.
Yeah.
God did it with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
He gave him up for all of us. He's shown us
Mm-hmm.
the way.
Yeah. But I think in a little bit simpler.
But I'm not God.
I know.
Right.
But in a simpler, form, when we see Jesus meet with Zacchaeus, if you're not familiar with this story, there's a man who would steal through tax collection.
Cast away all his relationships. No, he was the most hated man in the city. He was the arch tax collector.
And so he...
the arch enemy,
yes.
basically. But he was the chief tax collector.
So Jesus sees him and tells him he wants to have dinner with him in his house.
Yeah.
And what I love about this story is kind of what Greg just alluded to a second ago. When you're in Christ, these other things, I'm not saying, as I just mentioned a minute ago about an Apple Watch, those things still pop into my mind. I'll tell you, the reason I brought that up is because I actually put it in my cart on Amazon one night. They had a sale on some Apple Watches. I put it in the cart and I was sitting there and I just thought to myself, in all honesty, I said, Lord, I don't think I need this. Why am I even putting this in the cart?
Mm-hmm.
I already have an Apple Watch.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a little old, but it works just fine. But that was conviction on me in that moment. I think a lot of times when we're in the world and we're of the world and not in Christ, those things, and when I say that out loud, by the way, I'm talking about people that don't know Jesus, that don't have a relationship with him, that those things are easy for us just to grab onto because that is our only way forward. If you don't know Jesus, you're living for today. You're living for the moment. That YOLO mentality that we always hear about.
There's that dopamine hit too when you buy something new, and then it quickly goes away. So it makes you feel good. Look what I got, and it's the new toy.
Yeah.
You play with it for a little while and it's like the new car. It's a used car tomorrow.
Right. And with Zacchaeus, it wasn't maybe the dopamine as much. I don't know. There's some, like I said, he was stealing, taking more than he should have.
Oh, it was greed. Yeah.
And so, but when
Extortion.
he met Jesus in person, he saw that Jesus was Christ, that he was the Son of God. And that conviction that he felt, he told Jesus he was going to give away a significant amount of what he had taken from people. So there is conviction there when you come to know Jesus about the things of this world that aren't going to last, that are going to fade away, and realizing that there is a kingdom in heaven that he has established that is coming, and there is that second coming, and he will come on that white horse, and that is so much more important than anything of this world.
And what happens once you are saved? This is where it gets a little tough, because the Holy Spirit works inside of you and begins to change your heart's desires.
Yeah.
And these things start to become unimportant. The football game, being just a raving fan over some football player,
Right.
Or some football team, or a music band, And that's probably something that hits home a little bit more with me. But not only that, it's now all of a sudden I'm a Christian, the Holy Spirit's operating inside of me, and these things are not motivators anymore.
Yeah.
So now what do I do?
Yeah.
How do I deal with this?
Right.
Right? Yeah, the pursuit of money and wealth does not cause the drive in me that it once did, that I would sacrifice everything else for it.
Yeah, agreed. Continuing with the idea of success as something that we worship.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking, what are some other aspects of success? And one of them that I think comes to mind is marriage.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we oftentimes put marriage or a relationship with someone on the throne.
Right.
And it's the ultimate thing. I'm going to get married and this will validate me. She's beautiful and people will think that I'm, something.
There's a status symbol.
There's a status symbol, a bit of a status symbol sometimes. And, we see it a lot of times in rich, powerful men, as they go on to their second and third wife and they want to marry a young woman and they think that that's going to keep them from aging. And and what ends up happening is so much pressure is put on the relationship and that person that it crushes them. They can't come up to what that person needs. Mm-hmm. Even though the person picked that woman or that man, and made them the ultimate goal of their life, in the end, it's not going to work out well because that person that is up on that throne cannot be the God. We're all made to worship God. Mm-hmm. So we're all made to worship something, right? We can go back to the beginning of time and you can see the idols of the world.
Yeah.
Right. And they made a golden calf.
Correct.
It just came out that way. Right. Yeah. So wrong. But so we're always constantly trying to find something to worship. Mm-hmm. And we put that in all of these wrong places.
Well, and I think that happens a lot in our lives today. I know at one point when I was wanting to be in a relationship and I wasn't finding somebody, I was pursuing that. I had blinders on, mm-hmm. Everything else that was happening mm-hmm. around me was maybe really great.
Right.
But I was so focused on finding this one person that I wanted to date, hopefully be looking at marriage material. And I think that happens so often in our lives that we set our sights on one thing, in this case, marriage, and that blinds us from some of the other things. And in particular, we see that play out in the Bible with the story of Jacob, right? Mm-hmm. It starts mm-hmm. in Genesis 28 in the next few chapters.
Yeah. Yeah. He gave 7 years for Rachel, or so he thought.
Right.
And then, his father-in-law tricked him and gave him Leah, who he didn't want.
Yeah.
And then he gave another 7 years for Rachel because he had put Rachel as this ultimate thing.
Yeah.
And he really believed that once he had Rachel, he would be, I keep using the word validated, but it would raise his status because she was beautiful. And so, but you have to think about Leah in that question too, because basically poor Leah was pawned off on Jacob. He didn't want her.
Yeah.
Her dad didn't know what to do with her because in that time they had to marry them off, and there was unfortunately there was value in that. There was a dowry, in this case, 7 years of work. So, and then it ended up that Leah is bearing children, and really she's expecting her childbearing abilities to bring her husband to her, to
Yeah.
cleave to her soul, which he's not going to do regardless. So, she's put that relationship as the ultimate thing.
Yeah.
And it crushes her.
And something we see right here as well is that God made marriage, and marriage is a beautiful thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also intended to be between one man and one woman.
Mm-hmm.
And as Greg just described right here, we see Jacob marrying not one, but 7 years later, a second woman. And every time in the Bible that we see somebody who is being intended to teach us a lesson as we read it, that has multiple wives, it does not end well for them.
That's right. Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify that God does intend for marriage to be between one man and one woman.
Right. Certainly, it was a different time back then. The fact that it was a different economy as well, but
that doesn't justify it.
No, it doesn't justify it, not at all. But it's a matter of trying to understand, how we elevate things, and we're just simply using them as an example. It's a tough story, no doubt.
But the moral of that just being that marriage is a beautiful thing intended by God, but when we make that an idol, a focus of worship in our lives, that it can cause a lot of problems.
Sure, it leads. I'm sure it leads to many, many divorces in this world, because everybody. I think, we've got such a huge divorce rate in this country, and I think it's because people look at this and say, "This is going to complete me," right? Gosh, what's the movie with the kid with the head that weighs 9 pounds? Jerry Maguire. Cute kid, cute movie. But, you complete me. You have me at hello,
right.
and that's not true.
Yeah.
It's not true. It's sweet and it's cute and it's a great movie, but that's all it is.
Yeah.
Because if the priority of the relationships is not God first, and then the wife and then the family, it's not gonna end well.
Well, and when we ask the question about who's on the throne of our lives and are we willing to put God in that place, I think marriage obviously falls in this as well. If we were putting, as you just talked about, the pedestal, if we're putting our spouse on that pedestal, men for women and women for men, that they're going to fail. And it's not because they're not trying to be good. And when I say good, I just mean that they're trying to pursue you in a kind way. But if you two are not both pursuing God and trying to build into your own relationships with God, which in turn builds you two together towards God, then it is going to fail. And there are going to be hardships in those tough times.
Well, I mean, yeah, life is so hard. I mean, it Ferris Bueller said it comes at you fast sometimes, right? I love movies, you can tell. But you got to stop and take a look around. But
well, I'm just glad in that reference, it wasn't a 9-pound headed kid or however you just said that.
Yeah, he's a cute little kid, though. He's a cute kid. But, and that's another great movie, too, because, oh, gosh, what's his name? Show Me the Quan, right? It's all about the money for him. But yeah, no, life is rough. I mean, this is a tough and tumble world that we live in, and it's a broken world. You're not dealing with the person that's trying to look out for your good and their good. You're not dealing with that every day. So you're going to come up against troubles. And when that person is on that throne and they are going to fail in this world,
right,
then that person that's put them on that throne is crushed.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into the problem of, well, they've let me down completely. They've failed. And this is over. I can't amend this, right?
Well, and I think at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is, are we worshiping God or are we worshiping ourselves?
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. Yes. And that's a tough one. That's tough.
Well, and I think sometimes
I want it to be that I'm worshiping God fully.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is I think sometimes that we can get caught up. I don't like saying it because it's true. We can get caught up worshiping ourselves. And as I've already said, if we're in Christ, the hope is that you catch that very quick and you snap out of it. If you don't know Jesus, a big point of this podcast is that we hope that you do come to know Jesus, and not because of anything that Greg or I, because we lack in wisdom in a lot of ways.
Well, we don't have an MDiv.
We do not.
No.
But God would use this to speak into your life. That if nothing else, and you won't understand this term, I'm sure, but that it would just plant a seed, and that you would just be drawn to learn more.
Yeah, because the pain of all of these things that we keep putting on these thrones and the disappointment of it is just, it's a vicious cycle. It doesn't quit until you step out of that cycle.
Right.
And there's only one way to step out of it, and it's to put God on the throne and to surrender to his lordship.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, and maybe for you, the listener, take a few moments after this episode to think about what's taken up most of your time, energy, or devotion, and where are you placing your trust?
Yeah, I think see, you've thrown me another one there with passion, and what am I placing my trust in? I had this conversation with someone this week who's actually a CPA, and he has gone through, working for a big corporation and in the downsizing and, the feast and famine of things. And, we talked about the fact that we still, in the back of our mind, regardless, we still have something we're hanging on to. It's that little piece of my IRA, my retirement funds, my 401k.
Yes.
I'm safe. I'm okay. If I have to dip into my retirement savings, I can do it.
Those false senses of security.
Yeah, they're false senses of security. And we've seen that in past markets where those balances get banged up pretty good.
Sure.
And that's not a bad thing. I mean, God's got his hand in that, right?
Yeah.
Because what does that do? That turns people right back to the Lord, and it gets them on their back and says, okay, I'm not self-sufficient anymore. You never were, but it really makes them aware of it.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully that's a good wake-up call in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the point to it.
Yeah.
It's not pleasant. It's not fun.
Yeah. Well, guys, as we wrap up this time, I would just say that I really encourage you to think about those questions that we just raised. And I would just say, remember that we are called to live with an eternal perspective, to seek his kingdom.
Yeah, I'd like to next time really dive into 633, Matthew 633, to what that really does mean, to seek the kingdom.
Yeah.
What does that really mean? Am I doing that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope I am. I hope I am.
Yeah, well, we look forward to diving into that on the next episode. We thank you guys for listening to the EFOPOD. Stay focused, stay faithful.